Welcome back to JMC Live. We do this every Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern. I want to read some memorable quotes from September 11th. George W. Bush was quoted, and I have a couple here. Our enemies have made the mistake that America's enemies always make. They saw liberty and thought they saw weakness, and now they see defeat. Now we have inscribed a new memory alongside those others. It is a memory of tragedy and shock, of loss and mourning. But not only of loss and mourning, it's also a memory of bravery and self-sacrifice, and the love that lays down its life for a friend, even a friend whose name it never knew. How many of these troops do you personally know? A lot of people don't. Reverend Nathan Baxter, Dean of Washington National Cathedral, said, "Today we gather to be reassured that God hears the lamentation and bitter weeping of Mother America, because so many of her children are no more. Now let us seek that assurance in prayer for the healing of our grief-stricken hearts, for the souls and sacred memory of those who have been lost. Let us also pray for divine wisdom as our leaders consider the necessary actions for our national security, wisdom of the grace of God, that as we act, we will not become the evil we deplore." How many people can remember speakings and things that were said and things that have happened? How many people had to die for our freedoms throughout history? It's in the millions.
I would, if I could share, my cousin, who's a sergeant in the Army, he served 2 or 3 tours of duty in Iraq. And a few years ago, while he was visiting here in Ohio with the family for Christmas, and this was in 2006, he shared a story of something that happened when he was on tour duty in Iraq. There had been a Hummer that was driving, and it was either hit by an IED or a roadside bomb. And they brought the Hummer to his unit to be cleaned. They cleaned up blood and guts of their fellow soldiers out of this Hummer. They cleaned it up, and then they went to get in the Hummer, and when they pushed out on the seat, blood just gushed out of the seat of one of the Hummer. And he said that was one of the pretty bad things that he experienced while over there. The other thing that recently happened just a couple months ago was my cousin was asked to escort a fallen soldier's body home to America. And it was the first time he had ever done that. And his wife, she wrote, he really wasn't talking about, he won't really talk about it. He said, there was some movie, he said they just need to watch this movie and they'll understand. And I can't remember the movie, but my cousin is Sergeant Will Steinauer, and he's in the Army. I don't know what, regime or anything, but that's 2 stories that my cousin shared with me. This is the sacrifices he has made for our family, his children, and our country. And I really felt I needed to share that so people could really get an understanding. Then when you say that you're putting down the troops or thing, you're putting down some of my family members, because a lot of my cousins on both sides of my family are serving. So you might, next time you think something bad about our troops, maybe you could think, what if that was my family member going through that?
And now I'm going to share with you, and I do this every year, what the United States Coast Guard has to say. Because the U.S. Coast Guard had a big impact on what happened at 9/11. there was a young boy, I'll call him boy. He was a seaman. He's an E3. He just got out of boot camp. He was on a small boat. He helped choreograph the transit of the Manhattan people via boat and land just out of boot camp. There were firemen just out of boot camp and been in for a while that climbed the stairs of both towers. There are still Coast Guardsmen whose bodies are unaccounted for. They have not found a single shrivel of a bone or hair fragment. Lieutenant Michael Day was working at Coast Guard Activities New York, preparing to leave for a meeting at Tower 1 of the World Trade Center when the alert came in. We're unable to get any reports from Lower Manhattan since all communication systems failed. It was chaotic. People from multiple agencies were responding to the scene without any unity of purpose. There wasn't a pre-planned response. There was no con-op for how to respond to two planes crashing into flowers. The closest thing they could think of is the OpCell 2000 plan. I knew it had a lot of ambulance staging areas. We had a lot of evacuation points identified. Although it wasn't necessarily a full-scale evacuation plan, it had information. As Day rushed out the door to head to the waterfront, Andrew McGovern, pilot of the 100-foot pilot boat New York, showed up for the meeting. They grabbed a bunch of extra life jackets, the OpCell plan, a Coast Guard ensign, and headed for a pilot boat. I remember listening to the radio because by this time we were underway on the boat, and it was just chaos. Every channel you clicked to, people were screaming, "Help! People are here! I got someone hurt here!" With a front row seat to the collapsing buildings and frightening people and distressing devastation, Day only momentarily worried about his own safety. With thousands of citizens needing help, he didn't have time to stop and think about what was happening. Despite poor communication and unreliable cellular reception, Day began dispatching Coast Guardsmen with handheld radios to the piers to help coordinate a more organized evacuation effort. Meanwhile, he hosted the Coast Guard ensign on the pilot boat and began broadcasting on all available boats willing to help evacuation assemble at the tip of the Governor's Island and await further assignment. The process of transporting the crowds of people from Manhattan to safety, one boat at a time, continued into the evening. With the pilot boat docked in Lower Manhattan, still flying the Coast Guard's ensign, first responders began asking them for help. Establishing communications with the New Jersey Office of Emergency Management, he was able to start getting some supplies brought over to the pier. First water, then ice, and meals. Soon more specific items like tools and equipment and fuel showed up. We were quickly overrun with relief supplies. It was just a can-do effort. Everyone wanted to help. What he called a hands-on VTS, Day and a chief boatsman's mate, managed hundreds of vessels bringing supplies to the pier. We set up 3 different staging areas because the supplies were coming in so fast and furious. We were running out of room and we couldn't distribute them fast enough. The pure scope of the event and the lack of communication with his superiors meant making decisions wasn't easy for Day, nor his actions always by the book. But he looks at the response of great example of initiative and teamwork. Getting more than 100 boats and dozens of response crews to work together cohesively is not an easy task. But for Day, it just sort of happened under what he describes as common purpose. They also learned valuable leadership lessons. One of the value of partnering and partnerships and building your bridges before you need them, he said. 2, making your people feel empowered. I really felt when I worked for Admiral Bennis that I was totally empowered to do the right thing. And 3, I have faith in your people and the power of the concept of unity of purpose. After 4 days responding with only about 3 hours of sleep total and over 4 days, Day finally got some time to reflect on what happened. And it's when I had quiet time, a little bit of alone time with myself that I really struck home. I think me and the Coast Guard, we kind of shut things off at times of stress. It's a defense mechanism. Now I have to ask you guys what you remember. What do you think about? The unity. Mike Day and Andy McGovern and several others helped bring together what would have been a horrible moment. And if it wasn't for the U.S. Coast Guard, this stuff wouldn't have happened. There were also Later on, the Salvation Army showed up for resistance and for help, for assistance. So the Salvation Army eventually showed up for chaplain services and disaster management. But the first on-scene people, it was not the city of New York. It was the U.S. Coast Guard. This is the untold story of 9/11, right here on JMC Live. There are countless stories of how the Salvation Army and others have been involved, but the Coast Guard were right along with them. We'll be right back.